Who were you before the world told you who to be? Before the masks, before the compromises, before the tired smile that now clings to your face like a duty? There is a fatigue within you that no rest can heal, and you've mistaken it for weakness. But what if I told you that your exhaustion is not the result of doing too much, but of abandoning too much of yourself, the self you buried to survive? The self that still knocks quietly behind the roles you play. You did not grow in, you adapted. You learned to read the room, not your own soul. You became fluent in what others needed and went mute in your own language. They praised your resilience, but it was compliance. They applauded your strength, but it was silence. Now you carry the weight of years unlived and you call it responsibility. But there is a fracture running through your being, a crack between who you were and who you perform to be, and it's widening. You think you chose this life. You didn't. You negotiated it. Piece by piece, you bartered away your fire in exchange for safety, connection, approval. But what if the life you're living is the camouflage and your real life never began? What if the very traits that helped you survive are now the ones strangling you from within? They say you're stable, but can't you feel the tremor, the quiet panic beneath your routines? You are not tired because you did too much. You are tired because you betrayed your essence to be loved. I will not give you answers. That would only create new cages. I will not offer solutions, only mirrors. Because what's killing you is not the pain, but the absence of meaning. The silence of a self never allowed to speak. And I promise you this, until you face the version of you that you buried, no amount of sleep, success, or therapy will ever fill the void. You must go where you never dared, into the forest of your forgotten self. And once there, I do not expect to return the same. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to remember, but you forgot. You forgot how it feels to move with your own rhythm, to speak without rehearsing, to want without guilt. And now every moment lived in disguise accumulates like dust in the soul. But the psyche remembers what the ego denies. It sends signals: fatigue, disconnection, emptiness. And if you ignore them, they become symptoms, and eventually, symptoms become your story. But it's not too late, unless you stop listening. Shall we begin? Or will you pretend one more day that the ache inside you is normal? There is a particular kind of silence that forms inside those who have learned to adapt. It is not the silence of peace, but of suspended breath, the pause between who you are and who you're allowed to be. Most people never notice this gap. They fill it with routine, noise, performance. But if you've come this far, it means something inside you has begun to listen. Not to the world, but to the echo within. That whisper that says, "This isn't me." And yet, when you look in the mirror, all you see is the mask, a life well-behaved, a soul almost forgotten. You didn't choose this adaptation. Not really. You were sculpted by necessity. Somewhere along the path, love became conditional, and safety became performative. You became a shape that fit the demands of others. And each time you ignored your instincts to preserve harmony, each time you smiled when your truth wanted to scream, a piece of you folded inward. You called it maturity. You called it being strong. But it was surrender. Not the sacred kind, but the silent resignation of someone who has decided that existing is safer than being. And now, every cell of your being knows you are living someone else's dream. There is no freedom in pretending. And yet, pretending becomes survival when the cost of authenticity feels too high. Think back, not to a specific memory, but to a sensation. The moment you realized your emotions were inconvenient. The first time your truth made someone uncomfortable. The subtle shift in your body when you learned to shrink your light so others wouldn't feel blind. That was not growth. That was self-abandonment dressed as wisdom. You adapted, yes, but what did it cost you? Do you even remember the sound of your own inner voice before it was edited by fear? You wear exhaustion like a second skin now, but no one sees it. You wake up tired, not from labor, but from the constant suppression of what's real. It is not rest you seek, it is restoration, the return of something sacred that you don't even have a name for anymore. And here's the wound. They told you were loved for who you are, But they only stayed when you behaved. They said you were free, but only when you followed the script. So you learned to perform, and now you don't know where the performance ends and the real you begins. Tell me, who are you when no one is watching? And more terrifying, who have you never allowed yourself to be? Every symptom you carry, the fatigue, the numbness, the sudden bursts of tears that arrive without context, they are not flaws. They are messages. The psyche does not scream, it whispers. And when you don't listen, it creates crises. The body begins to ache where the soul has been ignored. The mind starts looping where the heart has been silenced. You call it anxiety. You call it burnout. But it is the soul's rebellion, the revolt of the forgotten self. Not everyone hears it. Most silence it further. But if you hear it now, then you are on the threshold. And thresholds, Jung would say, are dangerous because they mark the death of illusion and the birth of what's real. You're not weak because you're tired. You're tired because you've been strong in all the wrong directions, because you've been carrying the weight of an identity built to please, not to live. And here's the cruel paradox. The more you succeed in being who they want, the more distant you become from who you truly are. It is possible to achieve everything and still feel empty, because the soul was never invited to the table. And now something inside you refuses to be silenced any longer. But it does not shout. It stares. It waits. It places you here, in this moment, asking questions you can't unhear. So what now? Will you numb this too? Or will you let the ache speak? Because underneath your exhaustion is not laziness, and it's grief. Grief for the childhood self that was never held. Grief for the artist in you that was told to be practical. Grief for the wild, irrational, divine spark that was forced into logic and efficiency. This is not just burnout. This is mourning. And mourning is sacred. Do not rush it. Do not rationalize it. Just be still and listen, because you're forgotten. Self has been trying to reach you through your tiredness. And perhaps, just perhaps, this is not the end of your energy, but the beginning of your return. You were never meant to live divided. No soul enters this world with the intention of fragmenting itself into acceptable parts. But from an early age, you were taught the cost of being whole. Wholeness, they said, was too loud, too intense, too strange. So you learned to amputate what didn't please. You learned to exile the parts of you that were wild, vulnerable, contradictory, and in this process of selective disappearance, you became functional. And being functional, in this world, is a kind of praise. But inside, something began to decay, not visibly, not dramatically, quietly, like light fading in a sealed room. That's why you can't rest. That's why every vacation feels like a delay, not a relief. Because you are not fatigued from effort, you are fatigued from absence. The absence of depth, of presence, of inner alignment. You've mastered external balance, but within you there's a battlefield. One side desperately clinging to control, the other whispering for truth, and that whisper is growing louder. It does not demand, it reminds. It reminds you of every time you laughed when you wanted to cry, every time you agreed when you wanted to scream, every time you swallowed your needs to keep the peace. But there is no peace in suppression, only paralysis dressed as stability. People think healing is about becoming someone new. They are wrong. Healing is remembering who you were before you had to forget. And remembering is not always graceful. It is messy, it is terrifying, it is holy. Because when you start to remember, you do not just recall the light, you face the shadow. You meet the parts of yourself that you locked away, thinking they were too much. But they were never too much. They were true, your sadness, your rage, your longing, your irrational dreams. They were fragments of a truth you weren't yet allowed to hold. And now they return not to haunt you, but to complete you. The world taught you how to be liked, but it never taught you how to be whole. Because wholeness is inconvenient. It doesn't fit in systems, it questions hierarchies, it disrupts comfort. So you became likable instead. Smooth, polished, manageable. But deep down, you know, the most alive moments of your life didn't come when you were performing well. They came when you were real, when you broke, when you said too much, when you cried without reason, when you created something raw and ugly and true. That's the paradox. You've spent your life trying to become what they wanted, while the parts you rejected held the key to your vitality. And now, as the fatigue deepens and the distractions lose their shine, you begin to see it. You begin to feel the grief not just of what happened, but of what never did. The unlived lives inside you, the words you never said, the touch you never allowed, the laughter you suppressed, the wildness you buried under politeness. This is not a small sadness. It is ancient, it is ancestral, it is sacred. Because every human soul carries the echo of its own potential. And when that echo is ignored, it turns into ache. But here's the truth most will never dare to face. Your exhaustion is sacred data. It is the language of the soul saying, I cannot keep pretending. The persona, the mask you wear is cracking. Not because you failed, but because you're ready. Ready to stop performing. Ready to let life touch you again. Not through the filters of control and perfection, but through the rawness of real feeling. You don't need more discipline. You don't need more motivation. What you need is permission. Permission to rest. To rage, to dream, to collapse, to begin again without knowing how. You need permission not from the world, but from yourself. And this permission will not arrive wrapped in confidence. It will come trembling, but it will be honest. And honesty is where wholeness begins. Let the fatigue guide you. Let it show you what's been abandoned. Follow it, not to escape, but to return. Because in the center of your tiredness, there is a voice. And that voice is not telling you to stop. It is telling you to start choosing what nourishes, to start honoring what's real, to start feeling again, even when it breaks you, especially when it breaks you. Because the breaking is sacred. It is the cracking open of a life that no longer fits. It is the beginning of remembering. And to remember is not to go back, it is to finally come home. You've called it exhaustion, but it's something older than fatigue. It's the ache of misalignment, the silent scream of a soul contorted to fit a mold that was never yours. You've carried yourself like a structure built to impress. But beneath that architecture there's a forgotten cathedral, buried in rubble. And now every step forward feels heavier, not because you're weak, but because you're dragging too many versions of yourself that were never real to begin with. The achiever, the fixer, the agreeable one, the strong one, masks so well polished they've become indistinguishable from skin. But skin remembers, and now it's starting to peel. There is a violence in this kind of forgetting. A slow, elegant violence that smiles while it erases you. You said yes to survive, you smiled to be safe, you adapted to be accepted. But somewhere along the way, the cost of acceptance became your own reflection. And what they loved in you was not you, it was the silence you offered, the compliance, the convenience. They praised your strength while ignoring your sorrow. They admired your resilience, never seeing it came from wounds still bleeding. So tell me, how long can you perform a life that devours you from within? The psyche, unlike the ego, does not measure success in status or applause. It measures truth, wholeness, integration. And integration begins at the moment of rupture, when the well-dressed identity begins to crack and something primitive stirs underneath. The child who was never heard, the artist who was never seen, the lover who was never allowed to feel. These are not ghosts, they are your living shadows. And when they rise, they do not come gently. They shake the ground of your assumptions. They undo your false confidence. They make you feel like a stranger in your own body. But that strangeness is not a mistake. It's a calling, a sacred disorientation, inviting you back into yourself. You see, the parts of you that you suppressed were never broken. They were inconvenient. And what is inconvenient in a world obsessed with control is quickly labeled as wrong. Your sensitivity, your unpredictability, your intensity, your longing for something you couldn't name. You tried to exercise those qualities like demons, but they were angels in disguise, wings folded behind pain. They were the fire that made you alive, and you've spent decades pouring water over it, trying to be calm, composed, acceptable, and now you wonder why you feel numb. But numbness is not the absence of feeling. It is the burial ground of too many feelings unexpressed. There's a reckoning that arrives when the soul has had enough. Not loud, but total. It doesn't look like rage. It looks like stillness. Like sitting alone at night and realizing you don't know what you want because you've spent your life wanting what was safe to want. It looks like waking up and feeling foreign in your own routine. Like a sudden inability to fake a smile, or small talk feeling like sandpaper against your tongue. You think you're falling apart, but in truth, you're falling back together. The persona is disintegrating, and what emerges is not chaos, it's clarity. The kind of clarity that comes only when illusion dies. This is not a motivational speech. This is a requiem for who you thought you had to be. And requiems are sacred. They are the music of endings that make room for origins. So if you feel lost now, you are not failing, you are beginning. Because there is a self within you that has never been tired. A voice that never learned to whisper. A dream that was, never logical but was always real. And that self is not found by striving, it's revealed by surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of returning, of allowing. Of daring to no longer pretend. And when you stop pretending, the world shifts. You lose some people, you lose some habits, you lose the false comfort of being predictable. But what you gain is breath, real breath, the kind that expands your chest and cracks open your ribs and reminds you what aliveness feels like. Not perfection, not peace, but presence. Messy, honest, sacred. And in that sacredness, fatigue becomes fuel, sadness becomes guidance, and your story, not the one you performed, but the one you were born to live, begins to rise from the ruins. You have spent years negotiating with your own truth. Not outright denial, no, you are far too self-aware for that. You've danced around it, reworded it, softened it, delayed it. But truth, real truth, does not wither from neglect. It waits. It waits in your bones, in the tightness of your throat, in the pause before sleep when the world quiets just enough for it to whisper again. And that whisper becomes unbearable, not because it's cruel, but because it's real. And reality, when you've lived in adaptation for too long, feels like an intruder. It knocks differently. It doesn't ask for permission. It breaks down doors built from your own forgetting. So here you are, not broken, but fragmented. Not lost, but disoriented. And this disorientation is sacred. It means the map you've been following no longer leads to life. It leads to repetition, safety, approval, exhaustion. And now you feel it like a pulse beneath your skin. That growing suspicion that what you've built cannot hold the weight of who you truly are. You've dressed your cage in gold, decorated it with goals, fed it affirmations. But no matter how beautiful the prison, the soul will always feel the bars, especially when it was born to run. You keep asking, why am I so tired? But the better question is, who did you become in order to be loved? And what parts of you had to be silenced to survive that love? You see, adaptation is a brilliance of the human psyche. It saves us. As children, we learn to attune, to sense the invisible rules of our environment, to earn belonging by muting chaos within. But what saves the child often shackles the adult. You're not tired because you're weak. You're tired because you're finally safe enough to feel everything you once had to bury. And the body, in its ancient wisdom, knows when it's time to remember. The remembering is not intellectual. It is cellular. It comes in flashes. In dreams that don't make sense but leave you breathless. In sudden waves of grief when nothing's wrong. In the tightening of your chest when you hear someone speak their truth and realize you've never spoken yours. These are not coincidences. These are invitations, symbols. And Jung taught us the symbols are not decoration, they are instruction. They are the soul's vocabulary. They are how your deeper self speaks when words are no longer enough. Are you listening? Because the path forward is not forward at all. It is downward, inward, into the labyrinth, into the shadows, into the grief of unlived years and unspoken needs, into the rage you told yourself wasn't spiritual, into the desire you labeled dangerous, into the fear you mistook for weakness. You do not ascend by bypassing the wound. You ascend by entering it, by making a home within it, by lighting a candle in its darkest chamber and saying, I am not afraid of you anymore. This is not regression. This is rebirth, and rebirth always begins with fire. The fire will not destroy you, it will refine you. It will burn away the false selves, the performances, the personas, the polished fragments of who you thought you had to be. And what remains? Something. Raw, untamed, beautiful in its imperfection. You will not find clarity in the mirror of the world. You will find it in the mirror of your own chaos. And when you dare to look without flinching, you will see not a mess but a masterpiece in progress. One that was never meant to be understood by others, only embodied by you, and slowly you will begin to feel again. Not the surface feelings, but the ones with roots. The grief that cleanses, the joy that shakes you, the love that does not ask you to shrink, the truth that arrives not as a weapon, but as a mirror. And in that mirror, you will not see the tired version of yourself. You will see the one who never stopped knocking, the child, the artist, the wild one, the wise one, the one who waited patiently beneath layers of performance, saying, "I am still here. I have always been here, and I am ready now." Let them call it a breakdown. Let them say you've changed. Let them misunderstand your silence, your withdrawal, your sudden refusal to participate in things that drain your soul. You are not retreating. You are returning to rhythm, to essence, to life lived from the inside out. This is not a phase. This is a resurrection, a reclamation, a sacred revolt against the sleepwalking. And those who truly see will recognize you, not as someone new, but as someone finally unveiled. You learn to adapt. But now something deeper is asking you to awaken, to embody, to burn, to breathe, to belong to yourself again. And if you dare follow that call, not casually but completely, you will not just heal. You will remember what it means to be whole. There are truths that cannot be taught, only remembered. And perhaps that is what has been unfolding here, not a lesson, but a return. A slow unraveling of the threads you once used to bind yourself into someone lovable, someone productive, someone safe. You followed the map they gave you, and it led you far from yourself. But maps are for travelers, and what waits for you now is not a destination. It is a homecoming, not to a place, but to a presence, one that was never lost, only waiting. In the dim corridors of your memory, there lives a version of you that never learned to apologize for existing, that danced without rhythm, loved without armor, and cried without shame. That version was not weak, it was untouched, sacred. You buried it not out of malice, but survival. And yet even in the burial, it never stopped humming beneath the surface, like a melody you can't quite forget, echoing in the silence between your roles. What if the tiredness is not a symptom, but a summons? Not an end, but a threshold? There is no greater fatigue than the effort it takes to be someone you are not. And there is no greater relief than collapsing into your own skin, fully, wildly, without hesitation. You do not need to be rebuilt. You need to be reclaimed, recalled, revered. The fragments that seemed scattered were never broken. They were simply waiting for your permission to be seen again. And when you look at them now, not with judgment, but with reverence, they stop looking like flaws and begin to feel like instructions, invitations, reminders of what matters when everything else is stripped away. You were never meant to shine in silence. You were meant to roar in color, to fall apart and still rise, to love imperfectly and mean it completely, to rest without earning it, to feel not because it is convenient, but because it is the most human, most divine, most rebellious act. Left in a world addicted to numbness, what you feel now is not weakness. It is aliveness breaking through the cracks of your performance. The soul can only whisper for so long before it begins to quake. And that trembling is grace in disguise. Let them misunderstand you. Let them think you've changed. You have. But not in the way they imagine. You have remembered something ancient, that the truth doesn't need to be loud to be real. That the most radical thing you can do in a world built on conformity is to become yourself, fully, relentlessly, unapologetically. And in doing so, you become dangerous to every system that profited from your doubt. Because a person who has remembered who they are is a force that cannot be manipulated, controlled, erased, they become a mirror, one that others cannot look into without confronting their own forgetting. So if you leave this moment with anything, let it not be answers, but a deeper willingness to ask the questions you've spent a lifetime avoiding. Who were you before the exhaustion? Who might you become if you no longer needed to perform? Where is the edge of your truth? And are you willing to go there even if you must walk alone? The self does not emerge in comfort. It is forged in fire, in silence, in the tremble before the leap. And somewhere within you, that leap is already beginning. Quiet, certain, inevitable. Because beneath all the noise, beneath all the tired smiles and swallowed words, there is a simple, terrifying, beautiful truth. You do not need to be anything other than what you already are, to be whole. And that realization, when felt not in the mind but in the marrow, changes everything. It reshapes your past, reclaims your present, and reimagines your future. And it leaves you with one choice, the most sacred of all: to stop surviving and finally begin living. If these words stirred something in you, and something raw, something real, do not let it fade into background noise. Let it root, let it rise, let it move you to action, not because you were told to, but because something inside you knows. If you feel the echo of this truth in your chest, then I invite you, and not as a viewer but as a seeker, to become part of this space. Like this video, leave a comment with the part that broke you open. Share it with someone who's still asleep. And subscribe to the Archemind channel, not for content but for communion. This is not just a channel, it's a threshold, a mirror, a movement, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of your remembering.